Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1970-73 off-season carryover league draft analysis. We do continuing a series. We've been looking at spreadsheets and data, trying to prepare for the draft. We've looked at the keepers, waivers, retires of players, looked at them on Baseball Reference. We looked at the cards. And today we're going to get to what we call the 2560. The 2560, the number, what does that represent? You have 640 cards in any individual year in the timeline that I do. And if Strat-O-Matic doesn't produce that many cards and they fall short, I'll add additional nameless cards by getting additional data available from Baseball Reference to get to 640 cards per year. And for a 4-year carryover league, you take that number, multiply 640 by 4, you get 2560. And that would represent the total number of possibilities of players in the carryover league. Now, that doesn't mean all those players are eligible for the draft, but it does mean that there is that many to organize into a proper part of the spreadsheet. And so the spreadsheet, this file that I'm opening, is actually was last year's draft, and then I copy and paste in information to get ready for this year's draft. This actually is just scrolling through the draft results from last year. You have 256 players drafted. Everybody, all 32 teams gets 8 guys. Worst to first, of course. Last team to pick was the Orioles, who won the World Series 2 years ago. The Mets will be in that spot in the draft. And then after that, if teams don't have 20 players, and we talked about that in the previous video, if you don't have 20 players, it means you've improved guys, and your roster has 19 or 18 or 17 or 16 guys on it. Then there is a period of undrafted free agency based on first come, first serve with tokens added in. You start with 5 tokens. It's a trade commodity. It's a trade chip. And the team who acquires more tokens gets first crack at these guys. And the teams that lose tokens have to wait to fill their roster up. And this is a nice, it's almost like having an extra 2 rounds of the draft. You see there's about 10, 20, extra 30, maybe 40 players taken before teams start to pass. So that's an extra, averages out to an extra 2 roster spots. So there's a lot of work to do, because to have a great carryover league, you just want to make sure you are doing the most efficient pass through the data that you possibly can. And so I always go from the previous year and amend it to the current year. And one of the things I do is I assemble 4 separate sheets of data for 4 years of the league. If you can see the bottom tabs here, 4 years of data for 4 years. And what's pretty cool is 3 of the 4 years I can use the same data. Last year we had a spreadsheet here for 1969. That's been removed. We don't need those players anymore. But I have the same data tab from 1970. Let's look at that first. So in the 1970 data tab, you look at the rows to the left here, you see 640. And below that, there's nothing else. It's succinctly 640. Now, in this pink shading, starting in row 585, I use a code that I call 300 code. And there's other codes in this column, mostly 0. Starting from the beginning, in the previous draft, code 4, which is in column A, signified the carryover players for last year's draft. And then the C's indicated guys whose cards you can't take because, in other words, these 4s are actually in the carryover league, and these C's indicate that that player's card is taken in one of the other years. And then the code after the C is 0, which means eligible players for last year. And then after that, as you scroll all the way down, you get to 584 rows. And basically, that's all of the 1970 Strat-O-Matic cards that Strat-O-Matic printed in that reissue set. 584. That's 24 teams, 20 players per team is 480. 4 extra players get you to 576, and about 8 nameless cards and some other cards are thrown in there. And then these pink cards again. These are guys that I just hand wrote nameless cards in just so that I could distribute talent throughout all of baseball so that every team had 20 players. So this data sheet looks the same. 1971 is the 1971 data sheet. Looks pretty similar. The symbol 2 indicates that card is in the carryover league. Again, the letter C indicates this player isn't available because one of his other years is in the league. And then you keep scrolling down to the 0s. Draft eligible guys who don't have a connection to anybody, of course. And then again here it was 599. 599 guys. And then you see here the 300 players for 71. And there's a little bit more data down here. What these guys are just guys who I didn't add. I could have added these players instead of these players. But pretty much these were redundant players and not very good ones, so forth and so on. It's just an extra data field for me to analyze. Doesn't really go into the general sort, so it stops at 640. Then we go to 1972. And in last year, of course, none of the 72 cards were in the league pre-draft because that was the new season. So you'll see it starts with the letter C here. Goes all the way down till the 0s again. So it's consistent for the 3 years. And you get to 576 before you start seeing these pink 300 cards. Anything else down here? Probably not, no. Which brings us to the new data set that's brought in. The 1973 data set. Let's go all the way up to the top. And the 73 set that's brought in, it's in a interesting, the individual 73 season was drafted. First of all, you had to go to the total number of players, which was 579. Would have been 580, but there was a duplicate card, so it was 579. So I went out and added another 60 players. Same format, 300. Nothing down here, I don't believe. Right. But then, of course, you have to draft a league, distribute the 640 players over 32 teams. And column A, there's 2 columns of data here. Column B is actually the player, the team that he played for in Strat-O-Matic, the actual Major League Baseball team the player played for. And this is it's probably for some reason in a reverse order here, alphabetically, but these are all, including Montreal here, yeah, these are all the team names. You're not going to see any expansion teams here, of course. Just the 24 teams who played in 1973. Those are all represented in column B. And then in column A, a redraft is done, And you'll see that in the case of all these Texas players, you'll see that Don Stanhouse was redrafted to Baltimore, Sonny Siebert redrafted to Boston, Elliot Maddox redrafted to the Mets, Ken Suarez to Florida. This just shows you the team that those internal, that in that 1973 draft, who was drafted to which team, just for information purposes. It allows me to know where the card is when I open up the box and I physically want to look at the card. And I go, well, where's Ken Suarez? He's a Texas Ranger. Why is he not in Texas? I can say, well, he should be in the Florida stack because he was redrafted to Florida when I look at his card. So again, you see it's 640 grand total. The pink 300 cards, all these nameless cards, and every year will not be draft eligible. So the next step that I do is I take the 4 sheets and I combine them. And when you do that mathematically, you should come up with a grand total of 2560. Here is that spreadsheet. And when you look at the total number of rows, it's 2560. Now, once all this data is combined and all the fields match up with player name, Strat-O-Matic card, redraft card, year, and then you have all the data to look at here. We also have a number of, if I wanted to do a sort of the data, and I could re-sort these, and it would be in numerical order, a chronological order, alphabetically and by year, by doing a resort of a column. This is the way that when the data was put in originally. So I always could go back to the original order was put in before I did all sorts of sorting. So, interestingly, of the 2560, there's a nice big chunk of players, nameless cards that I printed, going back 73. You can see the year is in column B now. You see this year of 73. And it's about 60 cards, because again, it's like 576, 580. So it's 60 some odd cards for 73, 72, 71, and 70. And these cards will all be excluded, which means you actually have 2,340 cards to consider for the carryover league. So you've already dropped 220. Right off the bat, they're gone for consideration. Now let's go to the top of the sheet. And when we go to the top of the sheet, you'll see that what I've done is an alphabetical sort by team. Now the good part about this is I can continue to sort this spreadsheet during the draft, as I draft, because all I have to do when I draft a player is to input in the first 2 columns what draft pick it is and what team the player goes to. If you look here in the dark green, these are guys who are already in the league, so we assign basically a draft number. They've already been drafted into the league, so we just put a number there for the 12 players. Now what I do is, starting in year 1970, the first year, I skip spots 1 and 2 because they're going to be the draft picks. So I call the first record, the first player in that field, 7003, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are the 3rd through 8th players on this team, and the 1st and 2nd ones are going to be in the draft. That's 8 players from year 1. And the same thing continues. 7103, 4, 5, 6. 1 and 2 are drafted for a total of 6 players. 7, 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 are drafted again. And of course, you don't see 73 here yet because that card set's not been drafted yet into the league. So this lets me know that these guys here That's your current Arizona team. 12 guys, and that's who they are. And this is their actual stats. And then what you also have here, some more information. You see alphabetically, you have the first player, Philippe Alou, and what this is telling me is that this is Alou's 70 card, Alou's 72 card, and Alou's 73 card, which means his 71 card is the card that is being used in the league. When we look up top here, there it is. And when we look at that card, we see he's a 289 hitter with a 744 OPS. And when we look here at cards he has that aren't in the league, it's probably the best one, as he doesn't have an OPS higher than 721. So, I keep the record here, but most of the time, these C year cards, most of the time these cards aren't going to be drafted. These are what we call when you improve a player. And again, you're reluctant to do that because it costs you a draft pick. But all these cards with the light green shading are a direct reflection of the dark green shading. That means that these cards you have in your league, but if you want to replace one, these are the records you would be analyzing. And then if you draft them, you would put information into these two columns. Now what's interesting here, each team waives 2 guys. They don't necessarily have to appear in all 4 years. They do have to appear in the first year of 1970. Case of Arizona, it's Blefary and it's Boswell. So you have to have a 70 card for each. They do. They happen to have more cards for a grand total of 5. 3 Blefarys and 2 Boswells. Now, they're stored there for my information to let me know that Arizona waived these guys. But frankly, these guys are available to anybody in the draft. They're stored here so I know what team waived them. But basically, Blefary, Boswell in this case are available to any team. And remember, we have 4 keepers with the letter K in that field in this blue shading. Now, a keeper could be in any of the 4 years and in multiple years. You see, Darrell Knowles has 4 options available. Popovich, 4. But Dobson and Tatum only have 2. So you have the opportunity here to look at all of this data. And if you wanted to, this field, letter Z for batters, is the OPS field. So you could theoretically just do a sort of all these available players by OPS to find out who's the best hitter. You could do a sort by ERA, which is in this field for pitchers, or WHIP, walks on hits per innings pitch, which is in this field for pitchers. And as you scroll down, that's the format for all the teams. And this number of players is uniquely 12. We know that has to be 12. But the quantity of players in each team's area here is going to be different. It's going to be a random number. And all of this is done alphabetically by team for this chunk of data. You see retired players are in dark red. Jim Britton and Paul Doyle. Most of the time a retired player is not very good. He still has a Strat-O-Matic card, though we consider him to be retired because he's not very good player. So we have the red colors added. And this will go on. You see it's very similar. You know, you have your dozen players, and then you have a field here of, 40, 50 cards or so. California, they have a bigger, some teams you see have bigger chunks of players. And this will go down alphabetically per team. Now what we know about this chunk of players is that they all have a connection to the league from last year. The current 12 players and players that were waived or kept or other cards. So the next logical question is, well, who has not been in the league yet? And we have to continue all the way alphabetically down here. We'll page it down, as Toronto will be the end of it. And the last record for the Toronto player is 1810. So that means 1810 players have some sort of level of protection. You know, they're either a keeper, waive, retire. There's some sort of connection to the previous year or the current year. And then again, when I scroll down all the way to the bottom, to the pinks, 2341. So in between's the fun part. It's about 530 guys who are up for grabs. And that's the fun part of the draft. When do you take the guys? That's the competitive part of the draft, to make the draft as competitive as possible. And the draft strategy that I use is simply that it's best player available per team. So if you have best players as keepers, you got to take those guys versus going out and looking for a free agent. Now, for these available guys right here, if you look alphabetically, you can see they're by player. Starting with Ed Acosta, and then for each player, you have as many years as he has in this experience, which is, Ed Acosta is 2 years, 71 and 72. Some guys have 4. A lot of times if you see a guy with 4 years, it means probably none of the 4 years are good because he would have already been taken, but that doesn't matter too much either. But you see alphabetically, it'll go down to here. Now, what I did was, through the record 2127, and that would be about 300 cards. 1810 to 2127, about 310 cards. So 310 cards are in the years 70, 71, or 72. The first 3 years, they were in the league last year, and they're kind of up for grabs. Now, the new season, one of the rules I have in place for the new season, the 1973 season, is I leave those cards in the boxes or in the card holders of the team that drafted them. So that team has a level of protection. If you decide that, like for instance, Arizona, these players here, Reggie Cleveland, Arnold, Locklear, Mayshore, Corbin, Baney. If Arizona ignores these players, and then another team starts looking at the board for 1973, let's say the Braves. Let's say the Braves just cannot find a 73 guy they like. And then they start to put their eyes over here because they need a 73 player on some Arizona guys. Arizona would have some level of protection to say, well, if you want to make a deal, you have to go through us and you can make a trade with us. So that way you can't simply pilfer other teams' farm systems the first year they become available. After that first year, which is what all these cards are, it's up for grabs. If a team doesn't take a player the first year he's available, well then anybody could take him. So you have some good players here. And again, this is going to be about 1810 to 2127, 310 cards. And then the 73, you go from 2128 to 2340, 200 and some cards. So that's pretty much the comparison in the league. You've got 200 cards linked to a team of new players we haven't seen before, and you've got 300 players who have been available but nobody's taken them yet. And so what I can do at any point during the draft, if I just want to grab a chunk of data and say, well, let me sort it by year because I need to take a 1970 player, I can sort it by this field, which is year. If I want to just grab a huge chunk of data, I could sort it by the OPS column here. Or I could sort it by WHIP or ERA. However I wanted to look at data to do comparisons. So I don't have to keep roaming through the Strat-O-Matic cards over and over and over again and overly handle them trying to find the player I'm looking for. I could look at data right here to help me make a quicker decision to speed up the drafting process. So, that's a good summary of what the 2560 looks like. And before we exit this, I want to show you quickly, so how do you draft a player? Let's assume it is March of 2022 and we want to get going in the draft. So what's interesting here is that I do have the draft results. We just looked at it in the beginning of the video of last year. The new draft for this season begins right here. Eventually, eventually I will delete all this data here. It's not relevant anymore. But right now I'm just going to leave it. Because this data here has been replaced. So let's go back to the 69. And you see it has a 6901, 70, 71, 72, the 69-72 league, and the team that picked first was California. A year has gone by, of course, the year we just played, and so in March of 22, the Cleveland Indians picked first. When we looked at the elimination of last year, of course, we went through this in videos earlier this year. Cleveland gets the first pick based on their record. Of course, it scrolls down to the Mets, who won the World Series, picking 32nd. So you see Cleveland at the top, and when we page down, we see the Mets down here. Now, what happens is, in the draft, Cleveland is on the clock, and they have to pick a player from either the year of 1970, 71, 72, or 73, and that will be their first pick. And then the draft goes down 32, of course, and then in the second round, in this field, they'll take any player in the second round from those 4 years. So this is why I say you see Cleveland 7001 and 7002. Okay, that will join 7001 and 7002 will join 7003, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that ultimately I can do a sort when I'm all done of the 20 players. So the draft rules are, and I went over this last year, is a team picks best player available. In the first 4 rounds of the draft, they have to pick one player from each of the 4 years in any order. BPA, best player available first. A lot of times it's the new player in 73. After the 4th round, everybody has a guy in this field, in these 4 fields. This represents the 5th round of the draft, and we start with the new box, the 73 box. That's the 5th round of the draft. And the reason we do that is because that player is a 4-year contract, and that box is the largest box of players, and that box has the most new players who haven't been in the league yet. So that's why that becomes the most important 5th round pick. And then you go back in time, 72 for 6, 71 for 7. And in the last round of the draft, the 8th round, you're taking a player from the box with the fewest players available, of course, 1970. But the reason why we do it this way is that we're not overly concerned with how bad this player is, because he's only going to be in the league for 1 year. Looking at some 8th round picks from last year, I'll go over this spreadsheet because I know that it associates it with the team. We have Mike Shannon. He played okay for the Angels last year in a platoon at 3rd, and the Angels won that division. Las Vegas used Steve Whitaker in right field all year last year. They won a division. Jim Stewart, Padre utility guy, that was fine. Bobby Cox, they needed a third baseman against lefties. They took Bobby Cox, etc., and so on. Let's see who the Tigers and Mets took since they went to the World Series. Well, if you've been following, the Tigers took Dick Tracewski last year in the 8th and final round of the draft because they needed a shortstop. And we talked long about how important that turned out to be, as he played a key role in them as far as a defensive replacement and a guy with not much of a bat. And it was a key moment in the World Series. And I'm wondering who the Mets took in the 8th round. They took Joe Foy. Wow. Now that's pretty cool because he was a very important contributor to the Mets World Series championship. Foy was the leadoff man against righties, and I think he batted 6th against lefties. And Foy played for the Mets and Kansas City in the 69, 70, 71 era. So that's pretty cool that, you know, you get to see the 8th round picks. So what do you do when it's time to take a player? Well, let's just hypothetically draft a player for Cleveland. And we'll do a more depth analysis next time I do this. Let's say Cleveland, on the clock. They've got some keepers here. Tony Horton, Chente Romo, Duke Sims, Eddie Watt. Duke Sims, I remember, has a monster year one of these years. There it is. So 1972 Duke Sims car hits 316, 432 on base, 912 OPS. That's pretty impressive. 1972 Duke Sims. So, if he's my guy, and again, this is just hypothetical. I'm going to erase this. I would go over here. It's as simple as this. You copy and paste the spot you're going to draft him into. He's your first pick in the 72 player box. Come over here and paste the information in. Simple as that. And then you can come back, copy that, and boom, you go right back here, paste it in, and match up the whole record, paste special as values, and there you go. So now we see that Duke Sims, his record is in here, so I have it in the draft. I know who he drafted here, and then he's already, because he's got information in column here and here, I could sort this for Cleveland, and you would see 7201 Clee would be sorted. We'll just do this right here real quick. Do a data. We'll do a sort of column A, B, or BA, I should say. And when we do that sort, you see that Duke Sims, he's in there. After the 70 and the 71 card, you see Duke Sims 7201 is right there with 7203 Buddy Bell and 7204 Gaylord Perry. Now, I'm going to undo all that since he may or may not be the first pick in the draft, and I don't want to really do a draft right now anyway. Way too early in the process. So that's going to be it tonight for looking at the 2560. Next time we get together, we're going to do a further look in the 2560 and start looking closely at the players and really see what players have value in the draft by looking at their stats through the spreadsheet. We'll look at that next time. Thanks for checking out the video. We'll see you next time.